All right, let's get this out of the way first. I am sorry about the clickbait title. It's not really clickbait, but this video isn't really about the jig that I'm about to show you. It's more about my process for creating it and solving a problem that I had. In my shop, I make a lot of bonsai display stands like this. They're kind of like regular tables, just smaller. And when I make them, I do almost all mortise and tenon joints on the legs here. Those look like this. This is the mortise, and this is the tenon. When making mortise and tenon joints, precision is really important. You want the parts to fit together snugly, not too tight that you can't get them together, and not too loose so that they'll fall apart. The other problem is consistency. I need all the mortises and all the tenons to be exactly the same size. Now, making all the mortises the same size isn't really a problem. I just use my mortising machine over there. But making all the tenons the same exact size, now that's a bigger problem. The reason that that's a problem is because I use almost all reclaimed wood in my projects. Here are just a few examples of some pieces that I've reclaimed. This is some white oak, 2 pieces of white oak. This is a piece of walnut, and this is some jatoba or Brazilian cherry. You can see that they are all different thicknesses. All of my mortises are 1/4 of an inch, so I need all of my tenons to be 1/4 of an inch too. The way that I usually make them is I raise the blade to where I think it will end up making a 1/4 inch tenon. I have a stop block here that defines the length of the tenon, and then I run it through the blade multiple times, taking off a little bit at a time, rotate it, run it through again, rotate it again, run it through, and rotate it one more time, and then I have my tenon. And hopefully that tenon ends up looking something like this. Then I test it up against the mortise, and oh, that's too loose, which means I did it wrong, and now I have to try again. Since it's too loose, I need to drop the blade just a little bit and try again. Of course, I'm doing this all with test pieces before I use my actual work pieces. So that's a bit of a hassle, plus that really only works on square stock like this. If I'm using rectangular stock like this, but I still need a 1/4 inch tenon, well, that's not going to work at all because the amount that I take from this face is going to be different than the amount I take from this face. So that ends up being a lot of test cuts, a lot of wasted material, and a lot of prayer that the test cuts that I make will actually translate to my real work pieces. So that's how I've been doing it in the past, and it's ended up working eventually after a lot of failed attempts. Now, there are other methods of making tenons, like using one of these, a tenoning jig. A tenon jig works a little bit differently in that the workpiece is held vertically, and now the length of the tenon is determined by the height of the blade. Now, this may seem like a great solution, especially since you can cut some off of one cheek, move it to the other stop, and cut some off the other cheek. So this seems like this should be perfect. The problem is this falls prey to the exact same problem that I have with pieces that are not square. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to explain this very well, but here goes. If you're referencing off of the ends of the pieces, I'm going to take off a certain amount off here, and the same amount off this cheek and this cheek. So I'll end up with a tenon that's the right size in this direction, but it'll end up being too big in this direction because I won't have taken off enough here and here. And that becomes even trickier if I need an offset tenon like this one. This is exactly the orientation that I needed the tenon to be in for this display stand. So here's how I define the problem. I need to be able to cut the piece until I reach the end of the tenon, skip over exactly 1/4 of an inch, and then cut the rest. And then I need to be able to rotate the piece and do the same thing. Cut up until the end of the tenon, skip over the tenon, and then cut the rest. And it needs to be able to do that no matter what size workpiece I'm using, which means that this won't work. Typically when I need a new jig, I don't buy them, I build them. So my process is I search online for other people who have designed them or built them, and I look for something that inspires me. If I see something that's absolutely perfect, I'll just take that design and use it, or adapt it to whatever I need. So I looked around for a tenoning jig that cuts repeatable 1/4 inch tenons, and I couldn't find anything. I think this is the first time I've ever tried to build a jig where no one has ever done it before, or at least I couldn't find one. Which means I had to start from scratch. Not that I don't enjoy inventing things, I really do, not that I've done that a lot, but it took a couple of sleepless nights, and I think I finally figured out how to engineer this thing. Let me show you how it works and how simple it actually is. And here is my fabulous, not so pretty invention. You can see it's just a few pieces of 3/4 inch plywood that are screwed together. There's a toggle clamp and a few 3D printed parts. I'll show you how it works in just a minute, but just to show you that it does work, I just made this tenon, and let's see how it fits in this mortise. You can see the cheeks of the mortise are perfectly clean, and the fit is perfect. It's snug without being tight. Here's a slightly more detailed view of how this jig is assembled. It has these two pieces of plywood here, which will slip directly over the fence of my crosscut sled. It has this dado routed out of this front piece, which is about 1.25 inches wide. That's just a little bit wider than the widest workpiece that I usually use, which is just over 1 inch. That holds this vertically using this toggle clamp. On the front are these two little 3D printed holders. I'll get back to this piece in a minute, but this is a stop that slides into the T-slot of my fence. So here's that stop that I just slid in. I can tighten that down, and there's another 3D printed stop that's attached to the top of the sliding part of the jig, and when I put these two together, that's where the magic happens. The thickness of this stop and this stop is exactly the same thickness as 1/4 inch plus the thickness of my blade. It's actually not exactly the same thickness. I'm not exactly sure why, but theoretically speaking, it should be. I had to fiddle with it a little bit to get it perfect, but let me show you exactly how that works. If this is my blade, I'm going to start this cut by cutting on the left part of the blade. I will cut this part off, and then I need to skip over that tenon. Now I'm cutting on the right part of the blade to cut the remainder off. So I need to skip over the width of the tenon and the width of the blade. To set up the cut, I just need to know where on this workpiece the tenon is going to be. That's where this little setup piece comes from. I center this on the workpiece, and this has a 1/4 inch cutout, so I just mark where the sides of the tenons will be. Now I mount the workpiece vertically and secure it with a toggle clamp. Then I line up the left mark of my tenon with the right side of the blade, slide over the stop, and lock it in place. Now to do the other faces, I will rotate this 90 degrees, adjust the toggle clamp, and also adjust the stop so that this is centered. Straight off the saw, let's check the fit. And that is just about as perfect as it gets. And when I'm done using it, I unlock the stop and it stores right there. As great as this jig is and as well as it works, it's even better because if I want to do any larger tenons, all I need to do is swap this out for a slightly wider stop. And it's small enough that it can store pretty much anywhere. Well, there you go. Another perfect example of why I love building my own jigs. This thing works absolutely perfectly. It is versatile, it is accurate, it's repeatable, it was cheap, and it works with the crosscut sled that I already have. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, well, if you're sitting there, then you're watching this, so thank you very much. But if you're sitting there thinking, well, this isn't something that I'm going to use, I realize this is really a niche jig. and not very many people are going to actually need or use this. But I also realize I can't be the only one in the world who's ever needed to make repeatable 1/4-inch tenons. So for those of you out there who actually do need this, I hope you find this useful. But the other reason that I made this isn't so much for the jig itself, it's for the problem-solving aspect. I had an idea with originally no viable solution, but I went step by step in order to solve the problem. It took a couple of iterations, but ultimately, in the end, I figured it out and it works perfectly. And I hope that you can translate that to a problem that you're having in your shop or elsewhere. So either way, I hope you found this video useful. If you did, please hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, leave a comment, share the video with a friend, and I hope to see you next time.